So today I hope to talk about how the Buddha's teaching has survived. Now it's exactly 2,565 years since the Buddha's death, and Buddha's teaching has survived all this time. And I'm going to have a look at how it managed to survive. I'm talking from the Theravada perspective, of course. And this was mainly done through Buddhist councils. Buddhist councils are sort of conventions or assemblies of Buddhist monks. And there has been a number of Buddhist councils, which is recorded in the Theravada Buddhist literature, starting from 3 months after the Buddha's death, and right up to 65 years ago. The last one was in 1956. So let us see what the Buddhist council is. Now, a Buddhist council is a kind of large assembly of senior monks, convention, a conference, and they are specially chosen to participate in the Buddhist council, not only because they happen to be senior monks, but they are proficient in all aspects of the Buddha's teaching. And at least during the first few Buddhist councils, most of the monks who were participating were enlightened Arahant monks. So, and the numbers have varied from the first one, first Buddhist council had 500 Arahant monks. And the last one in 1956 has 2,500 monks. So the numbers have varied from between 500 to 2,500. And usually a Buddhist council is sponsored by a king. At least the first 5 Buddhist councils, we'll come to discuss that. Because when there is a royal patron, it has acceptability, status, dignity for the Buddhist council. And not only that, to hold a Buddhist council is extremely expensive. You have to have, say, between 500 to 2,500 monks staying together in one place from about, let us say, 6 months to up to 2 to 3 years. And you have to find accommodation, you have to find conference halls, you have to provide food and all the requisites of the Buddhist monks for so long. So most of the Buddhist councils had a king as a sponsor for these Buddhist councils. And when they decide to have a Buddhist councils, it's because there has been certain issues with regard to the Buddha's teaching, certain issues with regard to the disciplinary rules of the monks and nuns, or certain issues regarding the Buddhist texts. So when there has been a serious issue which threatened the survival of the Buddha's teaching, the senior monks decide to hold a Buddhist council. And the whole central purpose of a Buddhist council is to really make sure that the Buddha's teaching is preserved in a pure form for the benefit of the future generations. So when the monks assemble in a Buddhist council, first they will recite the whole of the Buddhist text, and they will discuss the Buddha's teaching. And if there are any disagreements, they will discuss and debate and agree on a final text of the Buddha's teaching. And once they have agreed on a text, they will recite it again and then decide how can we maintain this. Either in the past, it was maintained through oral tradition, and then of course it was written down. So let us go. So during the last 26 centuries also, there has been 6 Buddhist councils recorded in the Theravada Buddhist literature. And the first Buddhist council was held in India in 483 BC. That was just 3 months after the Buddha's death. There was a second Buddhist council held again in India in around 383 BC. That was 100 years after the Buddha's death. Then there was a third Buddhist council, again in India, around 250 BC. The fourth Buddhist council was held in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, in the 1st century BC. There has been another fourth Buddhist council held in India, which is not recorded in the Theravada literature, but I believe it is recorded in the Mahayana literature. I'll briefly mention about it later on. And then a 5th Buddhist council was held in Burma, Myanmar. That was in 1871. And the last Buddhist council, the 6th one, was held again in Burma, in Rangoon. It went on for 2 years from 1954 to 1956. So there has been 6 Buddhist councils recorded in the Theravada Buddhist literature. Let us talk about the first Buddhist council. Now, Buddha passed away in 483 on the full moon day of May. And one of his senior most Arahant monks called Kashyapa, as you remember, the 2 chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, had already passed away. And Arahant Kashyapa was residing in a jungle monastery. And he was coming to attend the Buddha's funeral. And on his way, he overheard a monk called Subhadda. Subhadda was, he became a monk in his old age, didn't like the Buddha's disciplinary rules. So when the monks who were not enlightened kept crying, weeping, and wailing about the Buddha's death, this Subhadda monk told them, look here, don't cry, be happy, be happy. When this big man was here, he used to tell us, do this, don't do that. We were not allowed to do what we can do, we want to do. Now that he's gone, we can behave whichever way possible. We can do things we want. We don't want to, if you don't want to do things, we don't have to do. So don't be happy, don't worry. And this Arahant Kashyapa overheard this conversation and he got alarmed. My God, now the funeral has not been held yet. And even before the funeral, if this is what some Buddhist monks are saying, what will happen in the future? So after the Buddha's funeral, he spoke to several other monks, Arahant monks, about his concern. And they all agreed that we need to get together as soon as possible, go through the whole of Buddha's teaching, agree on the teaching and the disciplinary rules so that we can maintain them for the future. So they decided to have the first Buddhist conference 3 months after the Buddha's death. And it was decided that it is better if the council was attended only by enlightened monks who had direct contact with the Buddha. So they chose 500 Arahant monks. And at that time, Venerable Ananda, who was the Buddha's chief attendant, had attained only Sotapanna. He was not an Arahant. So they encouraged him to work hard and become an Arahant. And in fact, he became Arahant on the eve of the Buddhist Council. So the Buddhist Council was held, the first one, 3 months after the Buddha's death, attended by 500 Arahant monks, including Kashyapa. Arahant Kashyapa was the senior most surviving disciple at that time. So he was rather sort of considered as a father figure at that time. And they spoke to King Ajasatta. He was the ruler by then. If you remember, King Ajasatta is the one who killed his father, Bimbisara, and became the king. So the monks spoke to King Ajasatta, and he agreed to sponsor the Buddhist Council. And the Buddhist Council was held in Rajgiri, which is in Bihar. This is the Bihar district. And as you can see, this is Bodh Gaya. This is Bodh Gaya. And this is Patna. That's the main city of Bihar. And this is Nalanda, where the famous Nalanda University is situated. And Rajgiri is somewhere near Nalanda. And they chose a cave called Saptapanni Cave. This is in Rajgiri, and it is still there. I was there 2 years ago. So they decided to hold the first Buddhist council in this Saptapanni cave. And King Ajasatta, he built a conference hall which can accommodate the 500 Arahant monks. And it was presided by Arahant Kashyapa, and of course attended by the 500 Arahant monks, including Arahant Ananda and Arahant Upali. I'll talk about them later on. And it went on for 7 months. So 3 months after the Buddha's death, attended by 500 Arahant monks, held in Sattapani rock cave in Rajgiri, and sponsored by King Ajasatta. And it went on for 7 months. So let us see what happened in the first Buddhist council. Now, being the president of the council, Arahant Kashyapa was the questioner, and he would question first Arahant Upali. Now, Arahant Upali was an expert on all the Buddha's disciplinary rules, which he had directly heard from the Buddha himself. So in the beginning of the Buddhist council, Arahant Kashyapa questioned Arahant Upali about all the disciplinary rules that the Buddha has made. And it is said that, Buddha survived for 45 years. And during the first 20 years, the Buddha didn't have to make any disciplinary rules at all, because all the monks are well behaved. And it's only during the latter parts, the 25 years, some monks started misbehaving. So each time a monk misbehaved, Buddha would make a disciplinary rule. And that's how the disciplinary rules were made, I believe. So Venerable Upali recited all the disciplinary rules. And then Arahant Kashyapa questions Arahant Ananda, who was the chief disciple of the Buddha for 25 years. And he had a fantastic memory. Arahant Ananda remembered all of the Buddha's discourses, and we are talking about nearly 18,000 discourses. He remembered them in his memory. So Arahant Kashyapa questions Arahant Ananda, and Arahant Ananda recited all the discourses, and both the disciplinary rules and the discourses were discussed by the 500 Arahant monks. And there was unanimous agreement by all 500 of them that it was authentic, genuine teaching of the Buddha. And then they they coded and arranged the disciplinary rules and the discourses. And there is a question about whether Abhidhamma, the Buddha's higher teaching, was discussed or not. There's no record as such, but there are some scholars who say that probably it may have been discussed, but not in full. So what happened after the first Buddhist council? So they coded all the disciplinary rules and put them into 5 groups. And as I said before, there are 227 disciplinary rules for Buddhist monks and 311 rules for Buddhist nuns. And they were all divided into 5 groups called Parajika Pali, the major offenses, Pachitya Pali, the minor offenses, then the greater section, Mahavagga Pali, Chulavagga Pali, and there was a summary. The fifth book is summary and classification. It's all available online if one is interested in reading. And then they recorded all the discourses. It comes to nearly 17,000 plus, or nearly 18,000. The vast majority of the discourses are delivered by the Buddha himself. But in the Sutta Pitaka, there are some discourses which are delivered by senior arahants like Sariputta, Moggallana, and Ananda, and things like that. And the discourses were divided into 5 collections called Nikayas. All the long discourses put into one collection called Dika Nikaya. There are 34 discourses. And the middle-length discourses, there were 152. They were called a collection of middle-length, Majjhima Nikaya. Then all the connected discourses were put into a Samyutta Nikaya. There were over 7,000 discourses there. And there were discourses which are numerically connected. I mentioned it last time also. They are put into Anguttara Nikaya, or 9,000 discourses. And all the remaining ones, the minor discourses, were put together in a collection called Khuddaka Nikaya. And there are 15 books. So at that time, obviously, there were no facilities to record Buddha's teaching. So what they did at the first Buddhist council was they agreed to memorize them and maintain them through oral tradition from teacher to pupil like that. So Vinaya Pitaka, Arahant Pali was the expert. So he undertook to maintain the Vinaya Pitaka discipline rules, he and his disciples. The Diga Nikaya, the long discourses, they were allocated to Arahant Ananda and his disciples. The Majjhima Nikaya, middle-length discourses, were allocated to Sariputta's disciples. Arahant Sariputta has already passed away, as you know. And the connected discourses, Samyutta Nikaya, were allocated to Arahant Kashyapa and his disciples. And the Anguttara Nikaya was allocated to Arahant Anuruddha and his disciples. And the last one were distributed among all the groups. And they agreed to memorize and maintain through oral tradition. And that is how the Buddha's teaching was maintained till about the 4th Buddhist Council. We will talk about it. And then we will go on to the 2nd Buddhist Council. Now, the Buddha passed away, and Buddha did not appoint a successor. And the Buddhist monks are all isolated, living in different parts of India. There was no communication among them. And some monks thought the Buddha's disciplinary rules were too rigid, and they need to be kind of interpreted differently or modernized. So what happened was, in certain parts of India, some monks started making some liberal disciplinary rules to suit their needs. And in the area called Vesali, again in Magadha Desha, there was a group of monks, not a small group, they say up to about 10,000. They changed some rules of the Buddha, and especially 10 rules, and followed them. And Arahant called Yasa, Arahant visited this area, and when he came to know that these monks have changed the Buddha's rules, he was alarmed. He was alarmed. And he advised them not to do so. And they tried to bribe him, in fact, and he refused to accept the bribe and managed to go and talk to other senior Arahant monks that the Buddha's discipline rules have been differently interpreted, and we need to do something about it. So they agreed to have another Buddhist council. And that was 100 years after the Buddha's passed away. And during that time, the king was called King Kalashoka, and he agreed to sponsor the Buddhist council. And the senior most monk at that time was called Venerable Revata. and it was attended by 700 Arahant monks and was held in Vaisali. That's also in Bihar, place called Valukarama. And if you remember, this is somewhere here is Bodh Gaya, and this is Patna. So Rajgiri, where the first Buddhist council was held, is somewhere here, and this is Vaisali. So the second Buddhist council was held in Vaisali. And it went on for 8 months. 8 months. Let us see what happened. So Venerable Revat, being the senior most monk at that time, he presided the Buddhist council. And another senior most monk was Venerable Sabbakami. Mind you, there was 7 or 8 Arahant monks who had actually seen the Buddha, even though the second Buddhist council was held 100 years after the Buddha's death. So they must have been about 120, 140 years old, some of these senior monks. So Revat monk, Bhikkhu Revat questions Bhikkhu Sabbakami about all the disciplinary rules. And they appointed a committee of senior Arahants, committee of 8, to listen to the questions and answers and to decide whether those 10 rules which are being practiced by that split group, whether they were according to the Buddha's rules or not. So the committee of the 8 monks, they decided unanimously that no, those 10 rules were against the Buddha's rules and they were unorthodox. And so they decided unanimously that they should continue to follow the Buddha's rules as the Buddha formulated them. The problem was the majority of the group, that big group called Vajji monks, they rejected this. And it says that this is a sort of first split in the Buddhist monastic community. And the Buddhist community, which was kind of united until then, split into 2 groups. The bigger group called Mahasanghikas, they split, and the Theravadins, the orthodox monks who decided to continue with the Buddha's original rules, they became a separate group. And the Mahasanghikas, the split group, they held another council called Great Council sometime later, attended by 10,000 monks, it seems. So that was the second Buddhist council. Let us go on to the third Buddhist council. Now, in the 3rd century before Christ, King Ashoka became the king, and he was a ruthless, cruel king. In fact, it is said that he had 100 brothers and he killed 99 brothers, sparing only his own brother by his own mother to avoid any future threats to his kingdom. And then again, he went to war with so many kingdoms. And after the final war, which is called the Kalinga War, in which over 100,000 people were massacred. And after this war, King Ashoka started feeling remorse. Is it worth it? What did I do? What are the effects on me? And things like that. And then there was a chance encounter with a very young monk called Nigrodha. And he listened to a sermon by this very young monk, Nigrodha, and became a Buddhist. He became a Buddhist. And at that time, the senior most monk was called Arahant Moggaliputtatissa. And the king now built, he became a Buddhist. He made the Buddhism the state religion. And he built 84,000 temples and stupas, I believe. And was very generous in providing temples and the food and all the requisites for the monks. And but there was a problem because of the king's generosity towards the Buddhist monks, all the other ascetics lost out. So what they did was, they also put robes and they also became Buddhist monks. They did know the Buddha's teaching. They did not practice the Buddha's teaching. And as a result, the Buddha's teaching and the disciplinary rules deteriorated. They also declined. And the senior monks refused to participate in any religious rites or mix with these people. And then the king was advised by this Arahant Moggaliputta that there needs to be another Buddhist council. So that was how the third Buddhist council was held. And it was about 250 years before Christ. And it was held in a place called Ashokarama in Pataliputra, and that is the present Patna. It was held somewhere here. And this is actually, this is a mural in a temple in Sravasti about the third Buddhist council. And this is supposed to be representing King Ashoka. And this is Arahant Moggaliputta, who was presiding at the third Buddhist council. So it was attended by 1,000 Arahant monks, and it went on for 9 months. So the third Buddhist council, sponsored by King Ashoka, held 250 years before Christ. It was held in Pataliputra, which is Patna, presided by Arahant Moggaliputta, attended by Arahant monks, 1,000 Arahant monks, and it went on for 9 months. 9 months. So in the third Buddhist council, they went through all the discourses and the disciplinary rules. And a special feature of this Buddhist council was that it says that they went through the whole of Abhidhamma as well, the Buddha's higher teaching. And they coded the Abhidhamma higher teachings into 7 books. This is called Dhammasangani, Vibhanga, Dhatu Katha, Puggala Pannati, Kathavattu, Yamaka, and Pattana. In fact, the 5th book, Kathavattu, is nothing to do with Abhidhamma. What Arahant Moggaliputta did was, he recorded all the discussions and debates that took part in the Buddhist council, and in this book called Kathavattu, but it was included in the Abhidhamma. So there are 7 books of Abhidhamma, of which the 5th book is the Kathavattu. Now, one important thing happened after the third council, because King Ashoka decided to spread the Buddhism. And before that, while this Buddhist conference was going on, King Ashoka himself learned Buddhist teaching from Arahants, especially from Moggaliputta. So he had some idea about the Buddha's teaching and disciplinary rules. And after the Buddhist council, he interviewed these bogus monks, and he managed to pick 60,000 bogus monks and chase them out of the Buddha Sasana. And then the king decided to send Buddhist missionaries to 9 countries in and around India. And of course, he sent his own son, who was an Arahant, Arahant Mahinda, to Ceylon, and his daughter Sangamita, who was also an Arahant, and she went to Sri Lanka following her brother's visit. And she took a branch of the Bodhi tree, and which was planted in Anuradhapura, the capital of the country at that time. And the Bodhi tree still exists in Anuradhapura and is supposed to be the oldest recorded tree in the world. And some of you who may have visited Sri Lanka may have visited the Bodhi tree in Anuradhapura. Now, let us go to the 4th Buddhist council. Now, there was a lot of invasions by South Indian kings into Ceylon at that time. And then there was a king called Valagambahu. He just became a king, and the country was invaded by South Indian kings. And he had to flee and hide in the jungle for nearly 14 years. And during these invasions, obviously they destroyed Buddhist temples, Buddhist books, and chased Buddhist monks out of the Anuradhapura and other areas. So there was a serious decline in Buddhism and Buddhist teaching and the practice. And at the same time, there was a famine, a severe famine in Ceylon, and it lasted 12 years. And the people died. In fact, thousands and thousands of Buddhist monks died. In one place called Tissa Maharama in the down south, 10,000 Buddhist monks died of starvation. And some monks managed to escape to South India and survive. And the other monks, they were surviving on just roots and leaves from trees, living in jungle. But still, they were practicing, they were remembering and memorizing the Buddha's teaching. Remember, still the Buddha's teaching is maintained right from the first Buddhist council, 3 months after the Buddha's passed away, until this fourth Buddhist council, which was held in the 1st century BC. So for that 3 or 4 centuries, the Buddha's teaching was maintained through oral tradition by the monks memorizing them and then passing on to the next generation. So because thousands of Buddhist monks died in this severe famine, there was a serious concern that if Buddhist monks are going to die at this scale, would they be able to maintain the Buddhist teaching in oral tradition? And so 2 reasons. One was the decline in the Buddha's teaching and practice. And the second reason, the famine causing so many deaths and the concern about the ability to maintain the Buddha's teaching in oral tradition. So they decided to have the 4th Buddhist Council. And that was held in 85 before Christ, in the 1st century. And it was held in a place called Matale. This is Sri Lanka. This is Colombo. And somewhere here is Anuradhapura, where the Bodhi tree is there. And Kandy should be somewhere here, there, where the Buddha's relic is enshrined. And this is Matale, that small town called Matale. And there's a natural cave temple there. This cave is called Alu Vihara. At that time, it's called Alokallana. And they chose to have the 4th Buddhist conference in this place. And it is still preserved. I was there 2 years ago, I was there. And Alu Vihara. So, and it was attended by 500 Buddhist monks. And the senior most monk was called Maharakkita. And it went on for 3 years. So the 4th Buddhist Council, this is the Buddhist Council held in Sri Lanka. I'll talk about another one. In Ceylon, held in 85 BC, sponsored by King Valagambahu, presided by Venerable Maharakkita, and attended by 500 Buddhist monks. And it went on for 3 years. Let us see what happened. So the 500 monks, they went through the whole of the Tripitaka, Pali Tripitaka, and they agreed on the purity. In fact, before the Buddhist Council, what they did was, remember, some monks escaped to South India during the famine, and the rest of the monks lived in the jungles. So when the monks who had escaped to India came back, the 2 parties got together to see whether through starvation and hunger, whether the Buddhist monks who remain in Sri Lanka has forgotten some of the teaching that they had memorized. And when they compared, they found that no, they haven't. The 2 versions were exactly the same. So they agreed at the Buddhist Council of the purity of the Buddhist teaching. And now they decided now it is high time that we start recording the Buddha's teaching. So a decision was made that the 4th Buddhist Council to record. And it was recorded on palm leaves and in that Aloka Lena in Matale. So when they were recorded, then the copies were sent to Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, places like that. Now, as I mentioned about possible another fourth Buddhist council, this is not recorded, I believe, in the Theravada, but in Mahayana tradition. And this was held in Kashmir in India around 78 Christian era, so in the 1st century, sponsored by King Kanishka, and it has gone on for 12 years. The purpose was to write a commentary on Abhidhamma. And at that time, the main tradition, I believe, was called Sarvastivada. So there were 500 monks, and they were headed by Vasumitra monk, who presided, and Ashwaghosa was the deputy at that Buddhist council. And they made a commentary on Abhidhamma and recorded Abhidhamma in Sanskrit, I believe. So that was a second, fourth Buddhist council. Now the fifth Buddhist council. Now this happened in the 19th century in Burma. As you know, Burma was invaded by the British in, I think, 1820s, and Buddhism suffered a lot, and the Buddhist practice declined, and there was a concern about the Buddha's teaching and the text. And again, there was concern about the continuity of the Buddhist text, because you remember the Buddhist texts are written on palm leaves in Sri Lanka at the Fourth Buddhist Council. And now it's nearly 2000 years since they were recorded on the palm leaves. So there was some concern about the continuity, long-term continuity of the teaching on palm leaves. And at that time, the king was King Minden. And he got an idea. He thought, let us get monks into one place, go through the Buddha's teaching, agree on the Buddha's teaching, the purity, and write them down on marble slabs, so that they will last forever. Yeah. So in 1871, the fifth Buddhist council was held in Mandalay, place called Mandalay. So this is Burma, got China here, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Laos, all around. And this is Burma, and this is the capital, Myanmar, of Rangoon is somewhere here. And this is Mandalay. And I'll come back to these two parts later on. So, and by that time, it has been 2,400 years since the death of the Buddha. So they decided, let us collect 2,400 monks. And it was presided by a senior monk called Jagarabhivamsa. And it went on for 5 months. Actually, the 5 months was just the Buddhist council. But it took 3 years to write down the Buddha's teaching on marble. They started in 1868 and completed in 1871. So the fifth Buddhist council held in Mandalay in Burma in 1871, sponsored by King Minden, presided by Venerable Jagarabhivamsa, and it was attended by 2,400 Buddhist monks, and it continued for 5 months. 5 months. Let us see what happens. So what happened at the fifth Buddhist council, the 2,400 monks, they went through the whole of the Tripitaka, they recited, and they all agreed that there were some corrections that need to be done. but they approved on a final true version. And as the king has already made arrangements, it has been already going on. The whole of the Tripitaka was engraved on marble slabs. And these slabs were quite big. They were kind of 5.5 feet tall, 3.5 feet wide, and 5 inches thick. And on each side of the marble slab, there will be between 80 to 100 lines written down. And it took 3 years to complete. And let us go there. And each slab is contained in each of these stupas. It's still there in Mandalay. I haven't been to Burma, but if any of you have been to Burma, you may have visited Mandalay and seen it. So there are 730 marble slabs. On 729 slab, the Tripitaka is written down. And on the last slab, there's a description of the Buddhist council and what happened. So altogether, there are 730 marble slabs, and each slab is enshrined in these stupas. Okay, then we will go on to the 6th Buddhist council. Now, this happens in last century. And there was some concern, serious concern, because the British had ruled Burma from 1820s till 1948. And Buddhism suffered a lot. And there was concern about the deterioration, decline in the Buddhist practice, and the negative effects of the British invasion. At that time, the Prime Minister was Unu, and the Prime Minister and the cabinet decided that we should have a Buddhist council to collect a number of Buddhist monks together, go through the Tripitaka. And then also they had a purpose, another purpose. They thought if we could maybe start spreading the Buddhism westward as well. Now, this is the only time that was sponsored, not sponsored by a ruler or king. It was sponsored by the government. And it went on for 2 years from 1954. It started on the Vaishakha full moon in May in 1954 and concluded on the full moon day of the May in 1956 for 2 years. And in 1956 is 2,500 years since the Buddha's death. So they decided to invite 2,500 monks. And they chose the place in Rangoon this time. The fifth one was in Mandalay. Let us see whether we can. Yeah. So the Prime Minister Unu and the government, they built a peace pagoda. This is the peace pagoda. It's called Kabaya Pagoda in Myanmar. This was built in 1952. And then they decided to build a cave temple. Remember, the very first Buddhist council was held in Rajgiri in Sattapanni cave. And the government decided to build an artificial cave very similar to the Sattapanni cave. Here, this one. And this was built from 1952. It was completed in 1954. And there were halls to accommodate 10,000 people, it seems. So they're quite a big undertaking. Right. So the 6th Buddhist Council was held in Yangon in Burma, sponsored by the Burmese government. And it was presided by one of the very senior monks called Mahasi Sayadaw. I'll talk about him again. So attended by 2,500 Buddhist monks from 8 countries, and like Burma, Ceylon, India, Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. And they also invited some Mahayana monks and also representatives from Mahayana Buddhist countries. So out of the 6 Buddhist councils, this is the only international Buddhist council. Remember, the first Buddhist council was held in India, only Indian monks. Second, in India, Buddhist monks, only Indian monks. Third one was held in India, only Indian monks. Fourth one was in Ceylon, only attended by Sri Lankan monks. Fifth one was in Burma, only attended by Burmese monks. But the 6th Buddhist council became a truly international Buddhist conference, attended by 2,500 monks from these 8 countries. And it went on for 2 years. 2 years. Let us see. Right. So Mahasi Sayadaw was the president, and he is the one who is to ask questions. And they chose Venerable Mingun Sayadaw. I'll talk about him later. Quite a character. And he provided the answers to all the Tripitaka questions. And there was some editing has to be done because they found that the Tripitaka, the teaching that was engraved on the marble slab, there was some mistakes. So they had to correct them as well. And they approved on the final version of the Tripitaka. They recited it. And they decided that after this conference, they will actually be printed. So remember, after the 4th Buddhist Council in Ceylon, they were written on palm leaves. And after the 6th Buddhist Council in 1956, for the first time, it seemed the Tripitaka was printed in book form. And they were also translated into 8 languages. Let me see. Now, remember I said the 6th Buddhist Council was presided by Mahasi Sayadaw Venerable. Now, Mahasi Sayadaw is a meditation master. He brought meditation to the West as well. And this Mingun Sayadaw, he was chosen to answer all the questions on Tripitaka because he knew the whole of Tripitaka by memory. He had memorized the whole of Tripitaka. And can you imagine the whole of Tripitaka? This is 16,000 pages, 16,000 pages. He knew it word by word, line by line, page by page. And he narrated the whole of that in this 6th Buddhist Council. And if you check, he is recorded in the Guinness Book of Records in 1985 as the record holder for human memory. So quite a figure, So I think I have come to the end. So 6 Buddhist councils. First one 3 months after the Buddha's death, held in India, Rajgiri. Second Buddhist council held 100 years after the Buddha's death in Vesali. Third Buddhist council was held in 250 BC in Patna. Fourth Buddhist council held in Ceylon in 1st century BC. Fifth Buddhist council was held in Mandalay, Burma, 1871. And the last Buddhist council was held in 1956 in Yangon, Burma. Thank you.